buildings themselves, we appreciate your insight. More of our coverage after a break. This is the tallest building in New York City today, the Empire State Building, as it was before, as it is today. We should note that the Empire State Building, for viewers in New York who are going to be able to see it whenever we get our signal back from New York, the Empire State Building is going to be lighting itself in red, white, and blue in honor of the city's loss and in honor of a nation moving forward. Welcome back to CNN's continuing coverage. I'm Joey Chen.
I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington.
We begin this hour with the latest developments in America's new war. Let's get the latest coverage developments here. President Bush is back at the White House now, returning from Camp David. Mr. Bush said America will begin a crusade against what he called a new kind of evil. And he had a message to people who are getting ready for the work week ahead.
Tomorrow when you get back to work hard like you always have. But we've been warned. We've been warned there are evil people in this world. We've been warned so vividly. And we'll be alert. Your government is alert. The governors and mayors are alert that evil folks still lurk out there.
Today, CNN has learned more about the extent to which the attacks on Tuesday left the government flat-footed. Only after the third attack, the attack against the Pentagon, did the government evacuate the White House, the Capitol, or the State Department. The order to evacuate came a full 12 minutes after the government was put on notice that the fourth plane appeared to be headed toward Washington. At last word today, the FBI continued to search an apartment in Delray Beach, Florida. Agents there are removing boxes full of materials. At least one of the men suspected of commandeering one of the four planes is believed to have lived in the apartment. CNN has learned that the FBI has taken 2 material witnesses into custody, and warrants for 2 more material witnesses have been issued as well. Across the nation on this Sunday, Americans lifted their voices in songs of faith and in love of country. Thousands gathered this afternoon for a flag-waving rally in St. Paul, Minnesota. Among those leading that event, Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura. Polls are indicating very strong support for the nation's leadership in the early days of this war against terrorism.
President Bush is urging Americans to return to work on Monday, but his administration has been working nonstop since Tuesday's horror, working on a plan to combat terrorism. CNN White House correspondent Kelly Wallace joins us now with a look at what Mr. Bush is calling a crusade. Kelly?
Well, Wolf, the crusade is a worldwide fight against terrorism. President Bush trying to pull together an international coalition. He worked the phone some more this afternoon, speaking with King Abdullah of Jordan and President Vicente Fox of Mexico. The president today calling terrorists evildoers. He said they have roused a mighty giant. He, though, called on the American people to be patient. He said this campaign against terrorism will take a while, but he said the U.S. will win this war.
After huddling with his national security team at Camp David, President Bush returns to the White House and urges Americans to try to get on with their lives.
Just like the farmers and ranchers and business owners and factory workers have a job to do, my administration has a job to do. And we're going to do it.
Back to business, but not business as usual, as Mr. Bush and his aides mount a full-court offensive to reassure a jittery public.
We're pursuing over 40,000 leads.
They can't destroy America.
Things have changed since last Tuesday. The world shifted in some respects.
The administration facing a delicate balancing act, encouraging an anxious country to go back to work while making the case its campaign against terrorists and those who harbor them will not be an overnight solution.
And, it will take time. It's not a matter of days or weeks. It's years. It's going to take the support of the American people, and I have every confidence it'll be there.
The support is there now. In a CNN USA Today Gallup poll, 86% said they support a military action even if it lasts several months. Support drops, though, to 66% if a conflict lasts several years. For a public angry about how these tragedies could have happened, Attorney General John Ashcroft says he will send proposals to Capitol Hill in days to strengthen laws to track terrorists.
We will develop the tools.
While Secretary of State Colin Powell calls for a return to normalcy.
If we stick in our bunkers and walk around afraid, they will have won. Well, we're not a fearful people. We know how to overcome tragedy, and we will restore a sense of normalcy to this society, to this country very quickly in a way that will impress the world.
And to underscore that point, Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill tomorrow will ring the bell at the opening of the New York Stock Exchange, and Major League Baseball players return to the fields tomorrow as well, while the Bush administration continues to work on plans and its response, Wolf, to the worst terrorism on U.S. soil. Wolf.
Kelly, as everyone knows, the U.S. economy was not exactly robust before Tuesday's attack. How concerned are they at the White House about the impact of all of this on the economy?
Well, the administration is definitely concerned. In fact, the president was asked this very question today. He said, no doubt about it, that these deadly attacks definitely have affected the U.S. economy. So there is some concern. There was concern, of course, as you noted, even before. But the president also looking forward to the opening of the markets tomorrow, to people getting back to work. That's why you're hearing this message from the president and his top aides, trying to encourage people to get back to work, to get back to their businesses. But Wolf, definitely the White House will be keeping a close eye on the economy and the opening of the markets. Mr. Bush is expected to meet with his economic team tomorrow exactly to see just how things go in this week ahead. Wolf?
I think we'll all be taking a close look at that economy. Kelly Wallace at the White House, thank you very much. Joey?
Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld is warning that the upcoming war against terrorism will involve unconventional tactics and a lot of time.
It will take a broad, sustained effort that will have to use our diplomatic, our political, our economic, our financial strength, as well as our military strength, and unquestionably unconventional techniques. And it will take time. It's not a matter of days or weeks. It's years. It's going to take the support of the American people, and I have every confidence it'll be there.
It's years, says the defense secretary. And with that in mind, a lot of young Americans shocked by Tuesday's events are finding themselves at military recruitment offices to see what they can do for their country.
I will support and defend.
I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
Against all enemies.
Against all enemies.
You're going into the Army Reserves for a 6x2 enlistment, 6 years of reserves, 2 years of inactive.
I enlisted the U.S. Army Reserves Monday of this week. The benefits are great. I mean, I'm in school. I'm trying to get through college. I can have it paid for.
I went to recruiting office about a month ago. I enlisted into the Army, field artillery. I want to go back to college.
I was with my family on the day that these things happened, and, you know, they obviously showed a lot of concern for me and my safety.
I got scared, knowing that I'm coming up here the next day to leave. I was scared that at first I didn't want to go in anymore. I called up all my friends and I don't know if I just made the biggest mistake of my life.
We discussed it, and and I told them how I felt. I told them that I was proud to be doing it. That I personally had a renewed sense of patriotism, and that anything that I did to help, help the cause to defend freedom would be just fill me with a sense of pride.
Being brave right now is what we need. I'm looking forward to leaving for basic training. I'm looking forward to doing my job, serving my country, and if I have to go to war for something, I'm doing it for the right cause. I'm doing it because it's my duty as an American and as a soldier in the military.
There has been talk in the wake of the terrorist attacks of reinstating the draft. The Selective Service says a draft would be much different this day and age than it was during the Vietnam War. Joining me now from New York is Lawrence Korb, who served as Assistant Secretary of Defense during the Reagan administration. Mr. Korb, thanks for joining us. First of all, your opinion, is reinstating the draft necessary right now?
Absolutely no. As you saw, you have a lot of young men and young women seeing this tragedy. They have a renewed sense of patriotism. They're going down to sign up. And last year, even before this, the military had met all of its recruiting goals. And whatever else this war may be, it's not going to be very manpower intensive. If you do use forces, there'll be unconventional forces, special operations forces, probably air power. So this is really not something that would necessitate increasing the size of the armed forces, and you really don't need a draft.
But what about those who argue that for what the Pentagon calls homeland defense, it's going to require a whole lot more people working at airports and other secure locations, and the military might be the best source for that kind of manpower?
Well, basically, the Homeland Defense is not just a Department of Defense mission, but the National Guard should be given that as their primary mission. In fact, that was recommended last March by a group that was set up by the President and the Congress to take a look at the whole situation for national security. And I suspect that will be their primary mission, and they will not then be put in a position where they'll have armored units to go fight a large land war, which is a decreasing probability. So I think what you'll see is they will get that mission and they will get the resources, and they'll be the ones that'll take the lead in dealing with that, both the Army and the Air National Guard.
Why does the Selective Service, which of course still exists, believe that a draft, if it were reinstated, would be a lot different today than it was during the Vietnam War?
Well, because they would use a lottery system. But they would not get rid of all of the problems from Vietnam, because if you allow deferments, for example, for clergymen, and you allow it for medical people, pretty soon, once you allow one deferment, you'll have a whole host of others. And the number of people that you need would be very, very small. At most, you'd have to draft 50,000 people out of a group of, 5 or 6 million young people turning 18 each year.
You know a lot about manpower shortages in the military. Where are the major shortages right now?
Well, the major shortages are those skills that are in high demand in the economy, pilots, for example, but that situation may be changing with what's happening to the airlines. People with specialties in the information area is another place that you have it. But the military has really begun to adjust. They put a lot more efforts, a lot more money, a lot more recruiters in the last couple of years, and in the last fiscal year, they met all of their goals.
Are the military leadership satisfied with the professional nature of the U.S. military as opposed to what used to be a draft service?
Very definitely, because the all-volunteer force is also a very professional force. People stay in for longer. In this day and age, you cannot learn all the skills that you need and be effective in a two-year period of service, which draftees have. No, all of them, if given a choice, would not want to go back. And given the demographics, it wouldn't make much sense, because we as a country have never been able to decide who shall serve when not all shall serve, and you need only a very, very small portion of the youngsters in this country each year to come into the military to make it effective.
On this issue of the draft, do all 4 branches of the U.S. military speak with one voice, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps, or are there nuances of difference?
No, they all pretty much speak the same. Now, initially, when we ended the draft in 1973, for about 10 years, there was a great deal of concern, particularly in the Army. But that has changed, because they've seen that what you get as professionals, people stay longer periods of time. I think the turning point was the Gulf War, because they saw how superbly those youngsters did there, because unlike Vietnam, where people were in for short periods of time, these units had been together a long time, and the soldiers, as well as the sailors, airmen, and Marines, had really learned their skills.
Lawrence Korb, thank you very much for joining us.
Nice to be with you.
Thank you. And not just the Bush administration, but also members of Congress have been very hard at work this week. CNN's Jonathan Karl standing by on Capitol Hill, where both houses are taking the first steps towards fighting this new war. First of all, John, what's the mood on Capitol Hill as far as reinstating the draft is concerned?
Well, clearly this Congress is in a war footing, that they are going on several tracks, getting ready for an all-out war. But one thing they are not talking about, Wolf, is a draft. As a matter of fact, we asked the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Carl Levin, what he thought about the need for the draft. His response was pretty much typical of what we've heard up here.
This isn't going to be that kind of a war. This is not going to be a big focus here on large movements of military forces, in my judgment. There will be military action. But the war here is going to be fought against the terrorist cells, and that means that we've got to use much greater intelligence.
Now, while there really is no talk about reinstating the draft right now up here on Capitol Hill, some of the other fronts they're working on all at once. One is allowing law enforcement to get new tools, new powers that maybe would have been balked to just 5 days ago on civil libertarian concerns, but new powers to try to increase security and to track down the terrorists that may still be in this country associated with the attacks. The Attorney General, John Ashcroft, has talked to all the congressional leadership today, I think with the exception of Tom Daschle and the chairman of the relevant committees, about new powers that he hopes Congress will grant him almost immediately when they return on Thursday. Powers that include greater efforts, greater ability to do wiretapping with a single court order, possibly some immigration steps. Congress is working both parties. There are concerns about civil liberties, but as Congressman Dick Gephardt said today, we are looking at a situation where we're going to have to talk about rebalancing the balance between freedom and security. Also, Wolf, one other thing I want to tell you about is John Kerry is also talking about allowing the military to come in to take over airport security. So a lot of proposals on many different tracks right now up here on Capitol Hill.
And what are you hearing about that legislation to provide some additional billions in financial assistance to the ailing airline industry?
Well, that is something that is very much on the fast track here. The specifics of it are $2.5 billion in immediate cash payments to the airline industry, another $12.5 billion in loan guarantees. There's some debate on it. It hasn't gone through yet, but that is one thing that the congressional leaders are working on. There is consensus that something needs to be done to bail out the airline industry. But, Wolf, leaders are pointing out it's not the only industry that may need immediate help up here. They're talking about the insurance industry, even the tourist industry, and also various other places that are affected because the whole economy, they believe, will be affected about this. So look for Congress when they return on Thursday to talk not just about the airline industry, but a comprehensive plan to stimulate the economy.
Jonathan Karl on Capitol Hill, thank you very much. Joey?
Just think about it, Wolf. The last draft cards were issued even a few years before the last members of Gen X were even born. Perhaps, but then again, maybe not, they can remember the Gulf War. Any other war is just from the history books to them. And as usual, with the gap between generations, many older Americans are now questioning the mettle of the nation's youth. CNN's Jason Bellini looks into youthful patriotism.
For a generation accustomed to fleeting fashion statements, for the moment, it's hip to be wearing the flag.
We drove in and we were saying we've never even done this on the 4th of July, like get dressed up.
Young people are flocking to nightly vigils around New York City, expressing a mix of emotions, including one that many from the X and Y generations have never felt before: patriotism, pride in being American, pride in their government.
I know in my particular case I've had a lot of issues with the U.S. government in the past. I mean, I'm gay, and they don't do a very good job, I think, of, supporting and including their gay citizens. And this is the first time I've really been able to look at the government in an, important situation and say they're doing a great job, and I'm glad to have them.
Older Americans have long wondered, do these kids have it in them? The love of country, the willingness to sacrifice. Having grown up in safe and privileged times, the under 30 crowd admits they've never been tested.
As a generation, we don't really have anything that brings us together because there hasn't been one world event that would do it for us.
Older Americans also have wondered whether their MTV generation compatriots know how to be serious, to not be cynical. Do young people care about anything other than that which directly affects them? MTV apparently thinks so. It switched to network news coverage the day of the disaster.
This is really unprecedented television.
TRL, the popular video countdown program with host Carson Daly, for the first time in its history, played not a single video.
Let's celebrate the gift of life.
You hear a lot of kids, all like, oh, the government sucks and blah, blah. But right now, I'm very proud to be, a voting member of our United States government.
Will the ADD generation lose interest quickly? MTV News reporter John Norris thinks not.
The idea of sacrifice, the idea of a threatening world it's foreign to them. And I'm afraid that this week may be on the brink of a real fundamental change in the kind of world we live in.
No, pretty much like the ways of America and like people around here and just America itself. Today, there was no reason not to be proud of the whole thing because of how people reacted to it,
For the younger generation, patriotism stoked not necessarily by tragedy itself, but by the way Americans react when the time comes. Jason Bellini, CNN, New York.
Gen X, Gen Y, the younger generation, and the huge responsibility, which may in fact lie in their hands. More on that now from senior analyst Jeff Greenfield. Jeff, tell us about it. Do they have what it takes?
Well, yeah, and I think you get misled if the question is whether or not MTV is playing videos or not. I was reminded last night in an extended conversation we had on CNN about this by our younger guest that the firefighters who rushed into the World Trade Center, many of whom never made it out, the police who rushed in, many of whom never made it out, the rescue workers down at that site now going through hell to try to find some semblance of perhaps a survivor. These are all young people. These are not middle-aged people. They're people in their 20s and 30s. So right away we can answer one question that certainly a major part of this generation has what it takes. They've been proving it for years by doing the jobs that don't get celebrated as much on television. I think the harder question is really not so much whether the younger generation has it in it, but whether our leadership has it in our leaders to rally the country around, not in these first horrible moments and days, but when the going really gets tough, either militarily or through the kinds of changes in our country that will make it a harder, less comfortable place to live in.
Well, yeah, Jeff, I think that perhaps maybe youthful optimism, youthful idealism might be enough to motivate young people, but I guess now as a parent, I wonder if parents of this nation will have the guts to say, sure, let my kid go and do the hard work that might lie ahead here.
That, I think, Joy, is an extremely important question because, particularly hard as it is for us older Americans to recognize this, it is the parents of this generation who lived through the 60s, who rebelled in at least in substantial numbers against the government. Also, many members of my generation were in that war, and it was a class division. But the fact of the matter is that it is the people who grew up in the 60s who express as if it feels good, do it. We really don't owe obligations to anything beyond ourselves except to our own political beliefs. It really is an interesting question of what that generation has taught their children and whether their children, in fact, will say, well, it's different now, Mom and Dad. This country's under attack. We are not divided. This is not a political debate. This is a matter of national survival, and we're going to be part of it, whether it means going into the military or whether it simply means tightening belts in a way we never thought this generation was going to have to do.
It also has to do with expectations. I mean, after all, we think to Vietnam as the first war where we actually saw pictures from the battlefield. In the time since, we can now see live pictures from a battlefield. That will surely change perceptions. And the other thing that comes to my mind is that we have such a different perception of military hardware and technology. When people say to me, well, we can bomb the you-know-what out of them, it's because they think planes will come by, bombs will drop, but they're not thinking so much about ground forces.
Look, the part of this is something that I'm certainly no expert about. You just heard a guest who does know something about it assert, as most have, that we're not talking about drafting hundreds of thousands of young Americans to hit the beaches somewhere, because there is no there as far as we can tell. I'll tell you something, though. It will be a more interesting question if militarily people decide whether in Afghanistan or whether in other states that harbor terrorists, it will require a protracted ground war. That changes the stakes incredibly. But I think the other part of this question that again is not the responsibility of the younger generation, but its forebears, is the degree to which the whole idea of confidence in leadership and trust in government has been undermined, eaten away over the last few decades, both by the conduct of our political leaders and by the adversarial, if not contemptuous, approach both of the news media, the late-night comedians, the popular culture at large, the quote, post-ironic culture in which you never take anybody seriously, in which you mock leaders for their flaws. And a really interesting question to me is, how are we going to get our heads around the idea that now it may be necessary to follow leaders that we've been taught over the years not to respect at all? That's a tricky one.
Our senior analyst, the thoughts of Jeff Greenfield with us tonight from New York. In the streets below Jeff Greenfield in New York City this evening, you've started to hear some of the rush of New York City life come back into place. As well, we know that the nation's trading system is to reopen tomorrow on the stock exchange. And over New York tonight, at this hour, you're seeing it, the Empire State Building, the tallest building now in the city of New York, lit up in patriotic red, white, and blue in memory of those lives that were lost in the course of this terrible series of attacks, and with an eye to what is ahead, building strength for the nation. Wolf.
Joey, more fallout today in the world of sports. The golf competition known as the Ryder Cup has been postponed for a year. The United States team informed the team from Europe it will not make the trip to England next week as originally planned. As you probably know by now, the National Football League took the day off today as well. CNN's Tom Rinaldi reports on absence of Sunday heroes.
If we wanted escape, instead, we need endurance. If we hoped for relief, now we show resolve. If we wished for celebration, we find silence. The American Sunday is defined by different kinds of worship. For decades, the end zone seats and the upper deck bleachers have formed the pews in the second church of the day. We understand that these are just players, that this is just a game. Yet the game grants escape and relief and celebration through our autumn Sundays. Not this Sunday. By any measure, the NFL is the most popular league in America. No, it doesn't have baseball's history. It can't boast basketball's global flair. Yet here, it seems to eclipse both with a concentrated passion. For many, it separates a single day of the week, and the weeks mark a separate season of the year. But we've witnessed a week unique in all years, separate perhaps for all time. So it is not a team that grants us a common spirit and a fervent bind this day. It is a week in time that grants us these things. When President Kennedy was assassinated in 1963 on a Dallas Friday afternoon, just 2 days later, the NFL played. When America was at war in 1991, the Super Bowl was played. But this is not an assassination. This is not a battle abroad. This is home. These are heroes in different uniforms. Usually, there are two teams. They share one game, our game. But this day, the game rests in the shadow of one country, our country.
We check the latest developments now in America's new war. The investigation is moving forward with word this hour that 2 new arrest warrants have been issued for material witnesses sought in connection with the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington. Elsewhere, federal transportation officials are considering a plan that would seriously restrict air traffic in and out of Reagan National Airport, which is just outside Washington. It is the only airport still closed after Tuesday's attacks. President Bush is back at the White House after meetings this weekend with his national security team at Camp David. Administration officials say more clues point to the involvement of alleged terror mastermind Osama bin Laden in the deadly attacks, even though bin Laden issued a statement today denying he was involved. The president has confirmed that he gave the go-ahead to the military to shoot down any unauthorized commercial jets if they approach the Capitol and the White House during the terror attacks. Search and rescue efforts continue at Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan. Mayor Rudy Giuliani has revised the number of missing at the World Trade Center attack to 5,097. He says that the rescue operation will continue until all hope is gone. Wolf?
Joey, the Bush administration is expressing its thanks to governments neighboring Afghanistan for their cooperation, including the Pakistani government, which will ask Afghanistan's ruling Taliban to hand over Osama bin Laden.
We will continue to work with Pakistan and India. We will work with Russia. We will work with the nations that one would have thought a couple of years ago would have been impossible to work with, to bring people to justice, but more than that, to win the war on against terrorist activity.
The key here to keep in mind is that what we're asking nations to do, and which the PACs have clearly made a decision to do, is we're asking nations to step up and be counted. They're going to have to decide. Are they going to stand with the United States and believe in freedom and democracy and civilization, or are they going to stand with the terrorists and the barbarians, if you will? And it's a fairly clear-cut choice, and I'm delighted to see that Pakistan has, in fact, stepped up to the task.
This is going to change the way we do business. It's going to change the way we go about our daily life here in the United States. It's going to require a greater emphasis on homeland defense, so we can defend ourselves against those who, notwithstanding our best efforts overseas, are still trying to get in to the country to hurt us. And so we should see this as a long-term campaign and do apply decisive force to it. And that force isn't just military force. It's all the elements of national power that are at our disposal.
In New York, the Afghan ambassador to the United Nations, who represents the Northern Alliance, the anti-Taliban movement in Afghanistan, says his group would make 15,000 troops available for any attack on Taliban-held parts of Afghanistan. And as we told you earlier, 2 new arrest warrants have been issued today in connection with the attacks. And authorities searched apartments in Florida and New Jersey believed to be tied to the hijackers or their accomplices. The Bush administration says the clues continue to point toward Osama bin Laden. CNN's Mike Betcher brings us up to date on the investigation once again. Mike, give us the latest.
Well, Wolf, that late word came from CNN Justice correspondent Kelly Arena. She says that the warrants are sealed and the people named are not named publicly by the Justice Department. But as well, this makes the total 4 people on the material witness list, so that is expanding. Of course, Osama bin Laden remains number 1 on the list, but investigators are working in overdrive trying to fill out the middle and the bottom part of that list. For example, in Delray Beach, Florida, FBI agents descended on an apartment there with 12 agents and began collecting evidence early this afternoon. They went in with boxes and extension cords and came out with black bags where they loaded the evidence into the back of that trailer and drove off. That apartment, according to authorities, was used by Saeed Al-Gandhi and Ahmed Al-Zami of the who were on board the United Airlines flight that crashed into Pennsylvania. Those 2 are part of the 19 who were on board those aircraft that crashed both in Pennsylvania, in Washington, and in New York. As well, in New Jersey, another apartment was investigated by FBI agents. This one, evidence was taken out of, which investigators say was very useful. That apartment was apparently used by 2 men who were arrested in Fort Worth, Texas Ayub Ali Khan and Mohammed Jaweed Azmath. These two men were pulled off a train in Fort Worth, Texas. Now, apparently on Tuesday, according to investigators, they were on a flight from Newark, New Jersey to San Antonio. That flight was diverted to St. Louis. They had gotten on a train in St. Louis and were on their way to San Antonio when they were picked up. They had box cutting knives and $5,000 in cash, and eyewitnesses on the plane who used their cell phones to call in before those aircraft crashed reported that box cutting knives were used by some of the hijackers on board those aircraft. So authorities are very interested in these two men. They are actually still being detained on INS charges and are not being named as material witnesses, but certainly the list is growing.
And Mike, tell us if any of these individuals who have been detained are cooperating or talking to federal law enforcement authorities.
Well, Wolf, there's a list of 25 who are being detained under INS regulations because they were here illegally. We're told many of those people are providing useful information. And what may happen is, as happens in many of these cases, some of these people might graduate from material witnesses to actual conspirators. And we should explain a material witness is someone who has vital information that can be used in the case and is also perhaps a flight risk. So we'll continue to monitor this. Keeps changing throughout the day and night as they go to more apartments and gather more evidence.
And we learned earlier, and tell our viewers, that there was some sort of connection between the bombing of the USS Cole in Yemen and the arrests that are now, at least the detainees who are now being picked up. What was that connection between the hijacking this week and the USS Cole?
Well, before the USS Cole was bombed, apparently intelligence agents in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, had a surveillance going on a person they thought or they knew to be a member of bin Laden's Al-Qaeda. Now, two of the hijackers in this Tuesday's attack were seen, at least one of them was seen meeting with this person on videotape. Then they discovered that this man had another accomplice. It turns out that those two people were two of the hijackers, and that information had been passed on to the FBI, but the FBI had not a good idea exactly where these people were, and they'd launched a nationwide search. And of course, the attacks in New York and Washington occurred before they could actually get to them.
Mike Betcher trying to follow all the threads of these various investigations. Thank you very much. Joey?
Well, as you may have heard earlier, President Bush is encouraging people across the country to go to work and go about their normal business tomorrow. That same message is being underlined, especially for the people of New York, by Governor George Pataki and Mayor Rudy Giuliani.
The people of London went through this during the Battle of Britain. And in fact, it was even different in the sense that they were being bombed every day. And what they did was they took precautions, they were careful, they had bomb shelters, they had hospitals, but they went about their lives and they didn't let the Nazi assault stop their way of life. And we're not under consistent bombardment in any way. We've had a tremendous attack, worse actually than any single attack during the Battle of Britain. But there's that fear. There's that fear that something like that can happen again. It should not stop us from going about our way of life.
We are a spirited and strong people, and we're not going to simply leave a crater where we had a symbol of New York. We're working right now. Monday, the New York Stock Exchange will reopen, the Mercantile Exchange will reopen, the NASDAQ will reopen. What the form of the rebuilding will take, no one can say. It's too soon. But New Yorkers will rebuild. We will continue to be the world financial capital. We will continue to have confidence in the unity, the spirit, the strength of New Yorkers, coupled with the tremendous help from people around the country, are going to allow us not just to get through this. We're going to come through this, and we're going to be stronger.
Adding to the chorus of the mayor and the governor, the president, and his message today: when you go to work tomorrow, be alert, but also know that the federal, state, and local governments are being alert as well on your behalf. More on the mood of the people of New York City and the latest on the search and rescue operation. Up there for that, we check in with CNN's Gary Tuckman. Gary.
Hello to you, Joey. 130 hours have now gone by since these terrifying incidents. and the hopes of finding survivors are getting lower and lower. No one has been found alive in the rubble since early Wednesday morning. The search does continue, but it really isn't going so well right now. Fires continue to burn behind me. The smoke continues to rise as New Yorkers get ready to go back to work tomorrow, including to work on Wall Street. And lots of things will have changed in the city tomorrow as far as getting to Wall Street. Many of the streets will still be closed to cars. They're instituting a ferry service between Manhattan and Brooklyn. It's the first time in decades.
All right, we have just lost Gary Tuckman, our connection to him in Lower Manhattan, but we'll try to return to him as soon as we are able to reconnect that line to Gary Tuckman. Meantime, watching the events unfold from across the Hudson River is one of Manhattan's neighbors. For decades, this New Jersey town has stood in the shadows of the World Trade Center. But as CNN's Richard Roth tells us, you don't have to be in the middle of the debris to feel New York City's sorrow.
They were the big neighbors next door, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, the star attraction for skyline gazers over in Jersey City, New Jersey, just across the Hudson River. Now the cloud of smoke is all that's left.
The view, that doesn't even really look like New York. It doesn't look like New York without the towers.
Long lenses poke through the canyons to see towers rubble. A photo collector named Butch came to the water's edge to revive some recent memories.
This is life the way we knew it and the way it should be.
Well, I'll stop over there in about 10 minutes to talk to them, see what they're going to do.
Jersey City was a good neighbor during the catastrophe. This is where ferries with the injured and scared fled to from Manhattan in a Dunkirk-style escape.
A lot of them were New Yorkers. The only way out of that ring of fire was this way.
Jersey City is connected to the trade towers in another, less sentimental way. It was at this mosque that Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman preached. Several followers were plotters of the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. Just steps away from the same mosque on Saturday at this apartment building, the FBI and other federal agencies seized a man billed as a material witness in the destruction of the Trade Center. A neighbor looked through his peephole.
I saw the people, the SWAT team, run up the stairs and, like covering each other and just making sure that they've got it, and they're shouting, "Open up, it's the police, it's the FBI."
There's a large Muslim community in Jersey City, living with new arrivals from all over the globe.
One of the great things about Jersey City, it's culturally diverse. You have people from all walks of life here, and unfortunately some people have tried to turn that around and make it maybe a place where they think they could hide out.
Since the first attack on the World Trade Center in 1993, the multicultural mix of Jersey City has expanded even further, helped by an economic boom. Now there's unity in condemning the attack.
Everybody do this song. It's not. Even if it's Muslim, it's got to be bad Muslim.
These people is not Muslim.
It's not Muslim.
Muslim never kill anybody. Muslim is never kill anybody.
But as the smoke clears on the city that's no longer in the shadow of the towers, a little bit of darkness remains. Richard Roth, CNN, Jersey City, New Jersey.
Rejoining us now from Lower Manhattan is CNN's Gary Tuckman. Gary, I'm glad to see that we have reconnected the line to you. Before we lost you a little bit earlier, I think you were talking about getting Wall Street back to work and how literally difficult it will be for Wall Street's workers to get back to work.
Joey, it's very difficult to get to Wall Street even on a good day. It's a very small area. Tens of thousands of people come down here, so many people are wondering how it will work out. The plan right now, they've put ferry service into place between Brooklyn and Manhattan. There hasn't been a ferry between these two boroughs for decades. This will be the first time they've done that since the 1950s. And also you have to keep in mind, many of the subway stations here in New York City, and New York has the largest subway system in the United States, are shut down, perhaps some permanently, because a couple of subway stations are under the World Trade Center. So it will be very difficult, but the city says it will be doing it. We want to update the number again. Right now, 5,097 people are still missing. The search continues for survivors, but no one has been found since Wednesday morning. A short time ago, we talked with a police officer with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey who was in World Trade Center Tower number 2 when the explosion happened. He was on the 4th floor. He was a canine officer. His dog is missing, but he survived it.
Well, seeing there wasn't much, we were covering up the civilian, Josephine Harris. We just on the ground hearing it sounded like a rushing locomotive or an avalanche coming at us. And feeling, it was the feeling that I was going to die. You know, that's the only thing I could think at the time. And it went from I was going to die to no, I'm going to live and go home and see my family.
Wow. You were trapped for how long?
We were trapped for approximately 4 to 5 hours.
What did you do during that time before you were rescued?
Well, we radioed for help with using our walkie-talkies, the fire department and myself. And we would try to keep each other's spirits up, trying to get through on our cell phones to our families. And
did you make a connection?
We finally did. Yes.
Wow.
I got through to my wife, and I spoke to her. It was a personal conversation, of course. But then I told her that I would have to give the phone up to the other firemen, and it was only right that they had to call their families just in case, of course.
There are a lot of dramatic stories like that we've heard over the past 5 days. About 60 police officers are still missing, 300 firefighters. And there's a firefighter story I want to tell you about today. It happened in Central Park in New York City. Central Park, if you haven't been to New York, is 2.5 miles long, about a half-mile wide. It is an oasis for New Yorkers, and right in the middle of Central Park is an area called the Sheep Meadow. The Sheep Meadow is about as big as 10 or 15 football fields. It's called the Sheep Meadow because in the early days of New York City, sheep used to wander around there. Now people go there, they lay there to get suntans, they lay there to have picnics, they throw frisbees around, and today there were probably more than 1,000 people in the Sheep Meadow. At about 3 o'clock Eastern time in the afternoon, a fire truck started coming up the path that runs through Central Park, and on top of the fire truck was a huge American flag. All of a sudden, you started hearing a few people clapping in the Sheep Meadow, and then everybody, 1,000 people strong, started clapping, many of them standing. Sustained applause for about 45 seconds. It was a sight and sound that no one there will ever forget. Joey, back to you.
Gary, before you go here, I want to talk to you about this notion of trying to balance returning Lower Manhattan to some sense of normalcy and yet trying to resolve the security issues that must still exist in that area. After all, earlier in the day, we heard that a passport believed to belong to one of the suspected hijackers was found several blocks away from the World Trade Center scene. And I'm wondering if they're going to allow people to come back in, thousands of people perhaps, come back in to work, how they intend to secure this. There's still fires burning and all that. How are they going to secure it?
The southwestern tip of Manhattan, Joey, will still be closed to everybody but the emergency workers and the members of the news media like us. That's where we are right now. But where Wall Street's located is more on the southeastern tip of Manhattan. And that's where people will be allowed to go. They're not going to be allowed to take their vehicles there, but that part of Manhattan is considered secure enough to have the tens of thousands of people return there tomorrow morning.
And as well, there are residential areas we've talked about before.
There are different degrees of residential areas here and how they're dealing with it. There are certain residential areas nearby where people are not allowed to go right now. In certain cases, they will escort people to their homes to get things out of their apartments. There are other areas a little farther away from here where people have the option of staying. A lot of them don't want to, but they have the option of staying. So those are the two types of areas we're dealing with. But there are certainly some parts of Lower Manhattan right now where people are not allowed to go back to.
Is that a question of stability of the buildings or just being able to secure the area?
It's a combination of both. It's a combination. There are many buildings where there's stability problems and they're not sure about how the buildings will last. And there are other areas which are in a security zone where they don't want people to return to.
CNN's Gary Tuchman for us on the streets of Lower Manhattan. Again, the shared grief of an entire nation continues. At this hour in Miami, we're getting these pictures from our affiliate WSVN. People of Miami coming out into the streets there. Candlelight vigil at this hour underway. You heard Gary Tuchman talk about the growing stem of applause coming in Central Park earlier in the day as New Yorkers greeted firefighters of that city and recognized them for their hard work. Indeed, the shared grief in Miami at this hour as a candlelight vigil is underway to remember the victims of Tuesday's tragedies. Wolf?
I'm sure that picture, Joey, is being repeated across the United States. One of the big questions, of course, after these attacks on America, how can this country prevent the kind of suicide hijackings that made Tuesday's devastation possible? The U.S. Transportation Secretary Norm Mineta says today he has appointed 2 new task forces. One will include pilots and airline officials who will focus on ways to stop terrorists from getting into cockpits. The other will come up with ways to prevent terrorists from getting aboard planes in the first place.
Our national transportation system has become a target. Passenger vehicles have been transformed into lethal weapons in a profane and cowardly campaign of violence. This past week requires us to develop a new system that will move people and commerce safely and efficiently. And that is the mission before us.
Mineta says the new task forces on air safety will make detailed recommendations by October 1st. Many people involved with airline regulation and the industry already are racking their brains for ways to make sure Tuesday's terror never happens again. CNN's Gene Meserve looks at some of the proposals now on the table.
For pilots, the rule of thumb in hijackings has always been be passive, be cooperative, get on the ground and into negotiations. Tuesday, the rules changed instantaneously. Commercial pilot Paul Emmons was in the air.
And my co-pilot and I basically looked at each other and said, you want to fly or fight? And he had his big steel flashlight, and if anybody came through the door, he was going to go after him, and I was going to get the airplane on the ground.
According to the Airline Pilots Association, pilots and flight attendants, the airlines, the FAA, and law enforcement are engaged in an unprecedented cooperative effort to improve aircraft security quickly.
We are at war, and we're treating it that way, and everybody's cutting through the red tape, making decisions.
Among the changes being considered on an expedited basis, whether to provide law enforcement escorts, whether to arm pilots with weapons, and how to modify equipment like the cockpit door so it is a more effective barrier.
This new door that we want I hope by Friday, really by Friday, I want a certification process approved by the FAA and the manufacturer in ALPA, and I believe we can have that, and then on our way to getting that door.
Some airlines have told their pilots to do what they must to save themselves, their aircraft, and their passengers. Pilot Paul Emmons says if his plane is under threat, passengers better hold on.
You should be wearing your seatbelt.
What does that mean?
We can start to maneuver that aircraft so that he cannot function.
Depressurize?
We can depressurize the aircraft, we can throw it around the sky, we can do all sorts of things, and he won't be walking when it's over.
Despite the financial distress of the airline industry, the Airline Pilots Association says no security measure is off the table, no matter what the expense. But some aviation watchdogs are critical. They say the problems and the solutions were known long ago, and they ask, why are we seeing corrections so late? Too late. Gene Meserve, CNN, Washington.
And this note, the 3 major airports in the New York area remain open today, but they're running far fewer flights than normal. 3 days after commercial airlines were cleared to take off again, LaGuardia and Kennedy airports are running about half the usual number of flights. Newark International has been running about 3/4 its usual volume. While the nation copes with this unprecedented tragedy, many are taking time out to reflect on what it means to be an American. CNN's Brian Nelson went to New York's most famous square, where patriotism has found some fertile ground.
Suddenly, everyone loves New Yorkers.
We traveled from Huntsville, Alabama, to come down here and show our support for the New York citizens. Want them to know that we're here. We feel their pain.
And New Yorkers, it seems, have rediscovered their own love of America.
I think we've changed forever. I am so proud to be an American right now.
Even here in Times Square, this shrine to American capitalism, where money usually talks, you're beginning now to hear the distinct sounds of a renewed sense of American patriotism.
The U.S. flag has become a fashion statement.
I think it's finally time we started showing the love of our country.
At the heart of Times Square, an American flag stands watch over the memory of the thousands lost last Tuesday, and to the thousands more never to see husbands, wives, fathers, mothers, and children again. Gazing up at the constellation of Times Square marquees, appeals to consumerism now compete with calls to patriotism. Times Square often reflects significant moments in history. It celebrated the end of a war that we remember being sealed with a kiss. And once again, the square is perhaps marking history, a renewed burst of American patriotism.
We're the United States of America, and I think we're truly united, and I think as an American, that makes me feel very proud.
I'm proud to be an American now and forever.
While there is still much grieving ahead,
Americans are grieving together as one. Brian Nelson, CNN, New York.
And this note coming up at the top of the hour, I'll have a special edition of Wolf Blitzer Reports. We'll focus on the military options now before the United States, including my interview with the Secretary of State, Colin Powell. To our viewers, stay tuned to CNN for all the latest developments. For now, thanks very much for being with us. I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington.
And I'm Joey Chen at CNN Center in Atlanta. As we leave you this hour, a thought about these last few days of pain and anger and reflection about what is important to each of us as individuals and to each of these individuals as part of one nation. A last word this hour from CNN's Bruce Morton.
The late Eric Severin, during his years as a CBS News analyst, wrote after one terrorist attack about the special strength of the shameless. He meant, of course, that people who are prepared to kill the innocent, who see the killing of children as an act of war, have a strength the rest of us lack. They'll do anything we won't. That is a feature of the enemy in America's newest war. They are shameless. They will kill anyone, do anything. Most wars are between the armed forces of one country and another, though civilians, of course, usually suffer in the process, too. But in this war, civilians are the other side's targets of choice. And the aims of this war are different, too. The terrorists are not trying to conquer U.S. territory. Their aim is to demoralize the United States, to make it afraid, make it retreat from the world stage. Osama bin Laden, for instance, would banish Americans and pro-American Arabs from Muslim countries. But there's another aim, to make Americans lose some of their freedoms, lose the openness in which we live.
The purpose of terrorism is to terrorize. It is to alter behavior. It is to force people who believe in freedom to be less free by altering their behavior and redressing a balance between freedom and security.
Almost certainly, Americans will lose some freedom, more searches, longer delays at airports, an increase perhaps in the number of people stopped and searched in their cars or on the streets, increased use of ethnic profiling, and so on. Most people would probably happily put up with some of this, but sooner or later draw the line. At some point, and different people would set different points, at some point Americans would lose the freedom that makes their country what it is, a place with lots of individual liberty, with a great tolerance for different beliefs. Then we're in trouble. On top of the U.S. Capitol is a statue of freedom. A friend whose apartment windows look out at the statue has been making a wish this past week for the statue and the idea it stands for. The wish? Hang in there, girl. Let's hope she does. I'm Bruce Morton.